welcome to another episode of the Hourlings podcast project. My name is Martin Wilsey, and I'm not your host tonight. Tonight, Dave is going to be your host. Dave, take it away.
Sure. Tonight's topic is how to get published in anthologies. And I kind of want to clarify that a little bit more and say it's how to get paid for being published in anthologies. Now, there's different levels of anthologies out there. There's what I'd call a full professional, which is full professional rates at 6 to 8 cents a word. There's usually a lot of competition for those anthologies. There's also what I would call semi-pro, which are anthologies that pay less than that, often 1 cent a word or half a cent a word, but at least they pay. And then there's lower level anthologies that don't pay in cash, but might pay in copies. We're not talking about those tonight. We're talking about getting your story published in an anthology that you can use as a credential, that you can put on your writer's resume that will earn you some money. So that's the focus tonight. All right. I'm going to toss it out to our other writers here. The most important thing for a writer to do to get their story published in an anthology is what?
I guess I'll start. For me, by far, absolutely positively, the most important thing is to read and understand and follow the submission guidelines. And this has a lot of moving parts to it. The length of the story, the genre of the story, the themes that they're looking for. Whatever the submission guidelines detail, stick with that theme. The surest way to get rejected is just to shotgun fashion, just submit a story that you wrote to every anthology that's open to submissions. Don't do that. Read the submission guidelines. I think that's the number one important thing.
All right, Shay?
Yeah, that's definitely important. I agree. I would also say that, writing a good story, but also knowing that there's a difference between novelism and short storytelling. And so they're definitely related, but they're a little bit different skill set. And so you do have to make sure that you practice short storytelling and workshop it in writing groups. Make sure that your story and your message is hitting, because it's a very, very unique set of skills to make a story effective in only 5,000 words, about maybe a little longer for longer anthologies, but that's hard.
Yep.
All right, I'll talk about a couple things. Marty mentioned the shotgun method. I know that when I publish anthologies and open them up to the public, i.e. they're not curated, they're open to the public, it's really weird because I start off with a deluge of stories and then it dies off and then I get another deluge right before the deadline. A lot of the stories in that initial deluge especially weren't even close to matching the topic, the guidelines, anything. And it was unbelievable to me just how many stories there were that just, I don't like rejecting people, but wow.
So do you think that's because they think that if they do it at the last second, if you're under the gun as the publisher and need submissions, that you'll be more lax, or do you think it's just human nature to just wait till the last minute?
Probably human nature. Now, but for me, the truth of the matter, it doesn't matter to me when it comes in. I'm still going to read it and I'm still going to consider it.
Right.
The only danger you have if you're publishing late is if I've already found enough good stories to fill the anthology.
That's a good point.
And yours
first come, first serve.
Well,
I think
not necessarily.
The submissions that come in later are more likely to have been written specifically for that anthology.
Right.
The ones where you put out the call for submissions and 8 minutes later you get submissions, the likelihood of goodness or
means they
may be thin.
That means they dug it out of a drawer.
Right.
Yeah.
But for instance, I'm not one of those big name editors. So, and I haven't done a Kickstarter or anything yet because I needed to build up a rep before trying to do my first Kickstarter. So I've been publishing anthologies at somewhere in the vicinity of 1 cent a word if you start parsing the numbers. And my last anthology was about half curated and half open to the public. I got 65 submissions. If you're doing a professional editing job like Zombies Needs Brains and the anthologies that they do, well, gosh, you may get 1,000 submissions. So you could, and they pay full professional rates. So you could, with an anthology like that, very easily be full with high quality stories long before you get to the end. So if you're going for a pro anthology, I'd say probably sooner is better. If you're going for a lower end anthology, it probably doesn't matter as much.
So I'm hearing that the sweet spot for submitting a story is right in the middle. So right in the middle of when the deadline, when it was announced and when the deadline is.
Well, okay. Another thing that I think, there's so many stories that we receive that don't actually adhere to the theme of the anthology. So most anthologies have a theme. In fact, here's a couple that some of us on this podcast have put out. The Outsiders, which is about somebody from outside coming to your town or village and causing problems. Here's an anthology on the topic of black markets. Well, you know, one of the biggest things I see is I don't even see how your story relates to the theme. I don't know if you guys have encountered some of the same issues.
Oh yeah, big time. I've actually published 3 anthologies my own self, 2 of which were the theme was the zombie apocalypse, and it was blatantly obvious people didn't read the submission guidelines, and oh my God, I got drowned in submissions. I lost count. I ended up filling up 2 volumes of stories that I considered decent enough stories to actually get published. And I also have a time travel anthology I put out. I was a lot more particular with the stories in the time travel anthology. But I got submissions that had nothing to do with time travel. They were historic pieces, for instance, and stuff like that.
Yeah, I've only ever been the editor or the manager or whatever for what did you call them, Dave? The ones that don't pay?
I called it other.
Other, okay. For the other anthologies. And in those situations, as you guys know, the goal is just to help the author get published. And so, sometimes I'll be in a predicament where I don't want to turn the author away. And so you just have to like change a couple of sentences or something, or have the character say something, or if the anthology is cat themed and there's no cats, just put one on the shirt of the t-shirt of the guy in the in the taxi cab or something. You don't want to do that for a paid anthology with the theme. And I would say that if you are looking for a place to publish, a story of yours that you already wrote, or you want a little more freedom in what you can write, there are anthologies out there that don't have strict themes, that are more broad, and so seek those out rather than submit to a theme that is clearly not what you want to write.
Yeah, one of my favorites is I'm currently doing an anthology called Fantastic Detectives, and one of the stories that I received was about a warrior queen. There was no mystery, there was no crime. There, it was essentially mythology, and I'm kind of scratching my head going, why? And it wasn't that it was terrible or anything, it was just no.
Well, I think that people do that because no doesn't cost them anything except a stamp or whatever. And usually now not even a stamp.
Well, I think that there's also some ideas being touted around that the best way to get published in an anthology is to keep sending your story out again and again and again.
Cast a wide net.
Until it gets published. And that's fine if it's a very good story, because, for instance, it's possible for a story to be good, but it's not quite what we're looking for an anthology, but there's nothing wrong with the story. But it's a whole nother matter when your story doesn't work. It's not a good story. And you keep sending it out again and again and again and again. It's like sending a business card saying, I'm not a good writer, and continuing to send it again and again and again.
Now, that's kind of an interesting point, that some anthologies do have submission fees. I know yours doesn't, Dave. But what would you say to that? And would you tell our viewers not to be daunted?
Not only no, but hell no.
Yeah, no, I think submission fees are a scam.
So no?
It is, that's a straight no from me.
Absolutely, 100% scam.
I don't know if I agree. I don't think I agree. I think that sometimes having a gatekeeping quality or hurdle for people to really think, huh, am I ready? This is not free. A no is not free in this situation. Puts you in a pool, in my opinion, of higher quality, at least more vetted submissions. And so I don't have a problem with a low submission fee. Something like $15, $25. That sounds okay to me.
On this one, I'll have to totally disagree, because I adhere to the principle that money should flow to the writer.
This might be a different podcast episode, but
yeah, it's interesting because the same thing happens with contests. I see periodically writers contests where you submit your story and with a $20 fee, and if selected, you'll get published in our anthology and you'll get a free copy. And they categorize it like, well, that's what the $20 was that you paid up front. If your story's good enough, you is a winner of this contest. But the thing is that they'll collect 1,000 entries and end up with $20,000 and self-publish it, costing them nothing, and just pocket the 20 grand.
And again, money should flow toward the writer, not.
I mean, the only thing I'll say to that is that, in the past 20 years, writing has become a lot more accessible. And that comes with good and bad. There is a huge amount of quantity of writing out there, and, having a small hurdle to ensure that the author has a little skin in the game and is really serious about writing ensures that people who are really not serious writers are not flooding inboxes of editors.
Well, I think the most serious writers would never pay a fee.
I would never pay a fee.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we agree. We agree to
this
disagree then. Our viewers try to decide. Leave a comment. Who do you agree with? What our viewers fight?
I'll also specify it this way. If a bunch of people pay an editor basically for the privilege of trying to get into their anthology, then the editor could actually make a profit just on the people who are submitting. And I would rather be part of an anthology where the editor's skin in the game is he doesn't make money unless he sells the thing. And selling the thing is what gets me as an author a wider audience. So as an author, I want not only to be paid, but I also want to reach the audience that editor can reach by selling the anthology. And I want to reach a wider audience. What you described, I think, is just another form of vanity publishing, with no incentive for the editor to go any step further to actually sell the anthology other than just, here it is on Amazon, go buy it. And as we know on Amazon, if you don't market it one way or another, it doesn't sell.
Well, let's end this debate by saying these are two valid points of view in the writing world, and it's a debate that will continue as writing evolves. So.
All right, so I'll harp on the next part, which again is writing a good story. I think everybody here can attest to the fact that we receive a lot of stories for an anthology, and many of them are not good. So to the extent that you could perhaps test your story with beta readers or people perhaps in your writing group, if you're in a writing group, and get some feedback on how effective the story is, I think that goes a long ways.
Are you tossing it out to us?
I am tossing. If you guys have
toss it out to us. Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, and I think this is one of the things I led with, that doing something in a short amount of time, it can sometimes be harder than doing it in a novel. I struggle with it a lot. In fact, I've sort of gravitated away from writing short stories for this reason. But when you can do it, it is a great way to launch your career for a small step forward into publishing an anthology, and workshop that is, that's another thing. That's a good, bless you. A short story lends itself very well to workshopping because it's short, right? So you shouldn't have any excuse for putting it through writing groups. You could put it through 3 writing groups and it would be no big deal because it's short. So that is one very strong side of writing a short story, I will say.
Yeah, I think that if you learn to write a really good short story, it goes a long way to helping you write a really good novel.
That's true.
And writing a story that doesn't suck is the best marketing that there is.
Man,
I mean, I've got a metric ton of short stories that I've published. I have them as freebies that I give away. If people sign up for my email list, I give them a free story. People love the short stories associated to give some more detail about characters in the novels that I have written. My wife calls it the DVD special features. And people love them. I just this year or last year published my first collection of short stories, and most of those short stories at one time or another appeared in anthologies somewhere else. And that leads us to another topic of you need to be particularly attentive to any contracts that you sign when you actually participate in an anthology.
Sure.
Because the rights that you are granting and the rights that you retain are important. So I'll let Dave go into this a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah, for most anthologies, what they'll usually ask for is first world publication rights for your story, and they'll ask for exclusivity for some period of time. Usually it's 6 months to a year. After that, you're free to do anything that you want with your story. So I think really stories have a lifetime, and being published in the anthology is a way to get some money for your story and maybe start out in the black, but it's only the first thing you're going to do with that story. As Marty said, I think you could use it as a free giveaway to entice people to sign up for your newsletter if you have one. You could self-publish it online. You could sell the rights to another anthology that does reprints. You could add a collection later on. So only think of it as the first step to using that story to achieve what you want to as a writer.
And a quick word on contracts. If you do get chosen, that's great. And if you receive the contract and are not totally comfortable with everything that you're reading, don't be afraid to communicate about it, to ask questions about it, and maybe even to request a tweak or a change. I'm not saying that they would say yes, but there's nothing wrong with talking about it and opening the conversation. Writers should not be scared or pressured into signing a contract because they got chosen. They should retain their autonomy and confidence in that regards.
Yeah. Now I don't mind. I've been queried several times by some of the writers about the contract, because they want to know things like, well, how long are you going to keep the rights?
Right.
What rights specifically are you looking for and stuff? And I expect that. So you're not going to piss me off if you send me a query letter like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, if you ask for a whole bunch of changes, well, in my case, I think that I've crafted a pretty fair contract that only takes the rights that I need, nothing more, and only for a limited amount of time. So I'm not really seeing where I would expect somebody to ask for and get changes from me.
Sure.
But you certainly have a right to ask about any contract that you're signing.
Sure.
Right, and in particular, pay attention to every aspect. If there's language in there that associates rights associated with audio editions, with foreign markets. I mean, there's a lot of aspects that can be retained or reverted within the contract. So just, your mileage may vary, but I'm lucky that I have an intellectual property attorney on retainer, and if I have a contract that seems overly complex to me or has clauses in it that I'm uncomfortable with, I can just have him look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Except he only bills in full hour increment.
Oh no!
Just so I encourage everyone to have a lawyer, but use them sparingly, or pile up a couple of questions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, another thing to look out for is in the contract is, when does the year start and when does the year end if they're going to keep a year exclusivity. For instance, if they say a year from publication, well, when are they planning to publish it? And what happens if their publication date gets delayed substantially by something like, say a pandemic, right? In my case, one of the anthologies I was working on has been delayed, and I kept the original publication date. So some of the stories technically are outside their exclusivity period now, and some of the writers are allowed to do what they want with them. Now, most of them aren't. They're waiting for the anthology to get published, but they don't have to.
And in fact, as an author, if the rights associated inside the contract, you can still be a decent citizen if they, have had a hard time getting it edited appropriately or other things like the pandemic. You don't have to be, a dick about it and just pull the story or, publish it somewhere else out from under them. I don't know where I was going with that.
No, that's fair.
I always like to say, don't be an asshole. As long as you'll never go wrong if you think about being kind first. People will remember that later if they deal with you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yep. So how about cover letters or email introductions when the people send in their stories? How do you guys feel about those?
Well, I always do them. I always introduce myself and give them the links, social media kind of stuff, so that they can check your bona fides. I think that helps if you want to get published in a professional anthology. It helps if you have real cred, because anthologists will give you a little bit more consideration because they want your fan base to buy their anthology. I would love it if Stephen King were to publish a book or publish a short story in ours. Neil Gaiman, hey man, write me a short story.
Yeah, that would be my dream. Stephen King, Neil Gaiman, and I don't know what, John Scalzi and Brandon Sanderson all in one anthology. Yeah. I would rule the world after that.
I don't know how I feel about entire cover letters, but I definitely support an introductory email. Polite, brief.
Right. I'm not talking about like a mailed and letterhead and all that kind of stuff. I'm
It's
talking
overkill.
about an email just saying,
Yeah.
hey, here's my link list. Here's my
Everything is-
story for your anthology, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Thank you for your consideration.
Totally.
Yeah. Everything is
brief.
email now.
What's that?
Everything is email now, but this is what used to be, cover letters.
Right.
But I will say I'm with that as well. I don't want you to tell me what the story is. You've submitted it, I'm going to read it, right? I do want you to tell me a little bit about yourself. I like hearing things like you've been published, or you've edited anthologies yourself, or that you've published a novel, or that you've been traditionally published, et cetera, et cetera. I like hearing whether or not you're in a writing group, because quite frankly, a lot of the stories that I read that are by people in writing groups have been a lot better on average than most of the stories that get submitted to me.
So I'll add one little tiny thing, that this won't get your story published, but this idea will definitely get your story vetoed. Make sure that you're using a professional author email address. I can remember getting stories submitted from like lickmylovepump@gmail.com, and it's like, I'm not even reading that story.
Listen, what if that story is like amazing from lickmylovepump.com?
I just don't do it.
All right, send it to me.
But the other thing we've mentioned is the
well, it
link.
depends on the story that you're submitting, you're requesting.
That's right.
The moderator desperately tries to grab hold of the conversation and redirect it.
Sensuously.
Sensuously. Awesome. God, where was I going with this? Oh, the links that are in there. I look at the links, and I suspect most editors do. I want to know what your audience is. My goal is to make money by selling this anthology. And while you're, dovetailing off of my audience, I'm dovetailing off of your audience as well, in a virtuous circle that hopefully gets all of us more exposure. So I will look at your links. I will look at your website. The flip side to that is you want your website to be professional. You want to look like a professional author if you're going to give me those links, or any editor of those links.
You don't want to look like it. You want to be a professional author.
He said. All right, and let's see. Other things that I worry about. Things not to do. I'll throw that one out for you guys.
Well, first and foremost, don't submit a story that's not to the submission guidelines. 2, don't be an asshole about it. Just don't start arguing with them right in the very first email on submission. That's happened to me before too. Don't start haggling about the fee for the story. I know the story's great, but I think you should pay me more money. Shut up and sit down. So there's a lot of things to not do. Don't drown the anthologist in emails all the time, requesting status on whatever it is. It's just don't be annoying, I guess, is my greatest advice. Jay?
Obviously don't submit a story that's not complete, not workshopped, not proofread. Don't use crazy font. Don't include things that could be legally challenging, like photographs that are not yours, quotes that are not yours. I think that's a pretty easy reject unless you're willing to cut them and it doesn't, change the story.
Well, actually, I had one of those where the author, somebody I knew, actually submitted a story that included a photograph of him on vacation. It was clever. It was part of the story, but the vehicle he was riding on at the time was an underwater vehicle and included a logo. And so I was willing to accept the photograph, which was a necessary part of the story, but I required him to go get the necessary releases for the use of the logo from the company as a condition of accepting it.
Or crop it out or blur it out or something like that.
Yeah, it would have looked bad without it. So I made it a condition of acceptance that he get the rights.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point. I guess in that case, that might be something worth mentioning in the email, like saying, hey, also a heads up that there's a photo in my story. We can talk about that if you require certain, policies be met or something like that.
Yeah, now I'm probably one of the few editors out there that likes having non-text components to stories and stuff. So I'm probably a little bit more amenable to that than most editors would be. So take that into consideration as well.
Sure. Yep.
What I don't like getting is reprints. When I said no reprints.
And how do you define reprints? Because I've seen debate about this, and I've seen recently, like, for example, like Reader's Digest is very strict about reprints. They include even a tweet or a blog post, something you said in a blog, not a blog post, a Facebook post, something you said in a Facebook post would be considered printed and published. How strict are you with what you mean by reprint?
If it's been publicly accessible, the entire story, then it's a reprint. That includes whether you published it in sections on your blog, includes whether you published it in your writing group anthology. It includes whether you used it as a reader magnet for your newsletter sign up, and thus it's available already to all of your audience.
How do you feel about social media though, like a Facebook post?
If you have published the entire story as a Facebook post, I would probably consider that.
Well, let's say an excerpt. Let's say someone publishes 5 paragraphs.
I don't care about excerpts.
Okay.
The caveat there being, if we're talking a short story, and you've given away the gist of the story in your excerpt, then I'm not going to be a happy camper about it. But in most cases, publication, again, if you put it on your blog, if you put it on as a reader magnet, if you actually have been published in some anthology somewhere, it's a reprint.
Right. And once again, be clear about that in the submission for the guidelines. Read that closely, and just be straight about it.
Now, if you query me, and we had a case in in Fantastic Detectives, a guy queried me and said, I have a story. It was originally published in Aries magazine. I think it's right on point for your anthology, but it's clearly a reprint. Would you like to see it? It's going to be in the anthology. It's a hell of a story. And it is, he was right, it is right on point for the anthology. So, don't send a reprint to an editor. I'm not going to look at it. But if you query and you tell me why you think it's a good fit and where it's been published and let me make a decision, I might just look at it. But if you send it to me unsolicited when it's against my submission guidelines, I am not going to be a happy camper. And given that I'm already busy reading the other stories, I'm probably not looking at it. How about, let's see. Has anybody ever had a story pulled from an anthology?
Like one of my own.
One of my stories?
Yeah.
No, what I mean is, while working on anthology, have you ever had somebody that actually pulled their story and said, "Tough luck"?
Yes, I have. I had somebody submitted a story. It was a great story. They got the acceptance letter, and it was edited, it was integrated into the anthology, and the guy sent me an email. I was expecting this signed contract back from him. And instead of a signed contract, he says, "Sorry, dude, somebody else bought it. Please don't put it in your anthology." After all the time and effort and work that went into it. And the lesson I learned there is the first filter is whether or not they'll sign the contract. And if I'm interested in the story before I do anything else, I will send them the contract and say, hey, I'm interested in your story. Before I go any farther, how's this contract look to you? And if they sign the contract, then it goes to the next level.
So in that situation, you hadn't given them the contract before you went.
Right, I made the mistake where I decided I'd pick all the finalists. I'd, have the whole thing edited and put together and formatted and the covers and all that kind of stuff. And
did you reply to his email?
Oh, I replied to it. I said, you're out. Thanks for the email.
You didn't tell him, you didn't give him a piece of your mind kind of thing?
Why bother?
Yeah.
I had a similar situation.
But trust me, I'll never work with the dude again.
Sure.
Yep.
Let me answer you. So I also have had that happen, Dave.
Okay.
As you know, I was the editor for one of our anthologies when that happened in our group.
Ah, yes.
That was.
I will recall the event.
One of mine. Yes.
Again, fully formatted and everything, and the person withdrew. So the bottom line is, when that happens, like Marty, I will never work with that person again. That person is dead as far as getting published in an anthology, and that person will probably be dead as far as any other editor that I'm personally acquainted with.
Now, what if they have like a legitimate, I guess legitimate is really not the right word. What if they have a situation where, like, they got offered like a really great deal and they really need the money, and they come to you and say, hey, I feel really bad about this and I'd really like to make it up to you, work with you, I can provide a different story, or are you sympathetic to that?
Yeah, it all depends on the details.
Yeah.
If they're not assholes about it.
Yeah.
Can work with people.
And for example, if I was lucky enough to edit somebody and they're being published in my anthology, let's say I publish them in my anthology, and somebody selects them for the best science fiction of the year anthology. There's about 4 of them. They get published each year, and they ask me if they can have an exception to the exclusivity because they're going to be in a best of the year anthology.
Right. Yeah.
I would grant them that exception.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, right. As long as they're not an asshole about it.
Yep.
But you have to ask me, because
yep.
Otherwise I'm going to be upset with you. If you explain the situation and you ask me.
Yeah, be kind. Most people will respond to that.
For sure.
Yeah, I would give you the exception, and I would tell everybody around me that, hey, one of the stories I edited has been selected for a best of the year anthology.
Sure. Cool. Yeah.
Right. So I think what we're getting to there is, one of the don'ts is don't burn your editor.
Sure.
Or you will stay there forever.
There's lots of ways to burn them. Don't waste their time. Don't be an asshole and piss them off.
Be willing to compromise in some situations.
Have fun with it. Yeah.
Yeah, being in an anthology should be fun. It should be pretty professional. All right, I'm going to go around. Any other things that people should either do or not do in order to be published in an anthology?
One of the problems I had with one of the paid anthologies I got published in, the authors within the anthology were not getting a writing credit. So you weren't listed as an author for the book, and it was pulling teeth.
You mean on Amazon?
What's that?
You mean on Amazon?
On Amazon.
Okay.
So it was pulling teeth to get myself listed as an author in this anthology, all because the anthologist, there was, I think, like 22 short stories in it, and the KDP interface only has 10 spots in it. and they didn't want to be bothered. So,
Yeah, I think that's an incredible point, Marty. Yeah, I guess the only last advice I can think of, it's soft advice, but I like to know the other people who got accepted into the anthology. So, yeah, you might not know them before the book comes out, but after the book comes out, I'll read their stories, and I like to reach out to them and, congratulate them and network with them a little bit and just get them into my circle. So think about who you're with in your anthology. That's my closing advice.
All right, and mine is basically follow the theme, write a good story, follow the submission guidelines, don't burn the editor.
Nice.
and repeat often.
Rinse and repeat. Good
That's
job,
right.
Dave.
All right.
Okay, I guess we're done for today. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you again next week. Heidi ho.